In this episode, we look at how security teams describe and prioritize vulnerabilities when there are far more weaknesses than they can fix at the same time. You already know that a vulnerability is a weakness that could be used or triggered by a threat. Now we need to add a practical question. How does anyone decide which weakness gets attention first? That is where public identifiers, scoring systems, and prioritization come together. Common vulnerabilities and exposures, CVE, give security teams a shared way to refer to known vulnerabilities, and the Common Vulnerability Scoring System, CVSS, gives them a common way to describe technical severity. Those tools are helpful, but they do not make decisions by themselves. A high score does not always mean highest business priority, and a lower score does not always mean safe to ignore. You need context before a number becomes a decision. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is part of our companion study series. The first book is a detailed study guide that explains the exam and helps you prepare for it with confidence. The second is a Kindle-only ebook with 1,000 flashcards you can use on your mobile device or Kindle for quick review. You can find both at Cyber.News in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A CVE identifier is a public label assigned to a specific known vulnerability. It gives people a shared name for the same problem, so they do not have to describe it differently in every tool, report, advisory, or conversation. Without a shared identifier, one vendor might describe a flaw one way, a scanner might describe it another way, and an administrator might struggle to tell whether both are talking about the same issue. A CVE helps connect the dots. It usually includes the year the identifier was assigned and a unique number. For spoken learning, you do not need to memorize the exact format right now. What matters is the purpose. A CVE identifier is like a tracking label. It points to a known vulnerability so security teams, vendors, researchers, and tools can discuss the same issue with less confusion. A CVE identifier does not automatically tell you everything you need to know. It identifies the vulnerability, but the identifier by itself is not a full risk decision. A CVE record may describe what product or component is affected, what kind of weakness exists, and where to find related references. That is useful, but you still have to ask whether your organization uses the affected technology. You also need to know whether the vulnerable system is exposed, whether a fix exists, whether attackers are actively exploiting it, and whether the affected asset supports something important. A CVE can help you find the right information, but it does not replace judgment. When you see a CVE in a report, treat it as a starting point for investigation. It tells you which known weakness is being discussed, not whether your specific organization is in immediate danger. CVSS is a scoring method used to describe the technical severity of a vulnerability. It tries to answer questions such as how easy the vulnerability is to exploit, whether the attacker needs access first, whether user interaction is required, and what kind of impact the vulnerability could have on confidentiality, integrity, or availability. Confidentiality means keeping information from being seen by people who should not see it. Integrity means keeping information and systems accurate and trustworthy. Availability means keeping systems and data accessible when they are needed. CVSS helps turn those technical characteristics into a score. The score gives security teams a common language for severity. It helps vendors, scanners, and analysts communicate more clearly. Still, the score is not the same as business risk. It is an important input, not the whole answer. The CVSS score is often shown as a number on a scale from 0 to 10, with higher numbers representing greater technical severity. Since this is an audio-first course, focus less on memorizing the scale and more on the meaning behind it. A vulnerability that can be exploited remotely, without authentication, and that allows major system compromise will usually score high. A vulnerability that requires local access, special conditions, or limited permissions may score lower. The score attempts to summarize technical seriousness in a consistent way. That consistency matters because security teams may receive findings from many tools and vendors. If each source used its own vague labels, prioritization would be even harder. CVSS gives everyone a more standardized starting point. But you should hear the phrase starting point very clearly. A score can help you begin the conversation, but it should not end the conversation. One common mistake is treating the highest CVSS score as the highest priority every time. That sounds logical at first, but real environments are more complicated. A vulnerability with a very high score might exist on a system that is isolated, scheduled for retirement, and contains no sensitive data. Another vulnerability with a lower score might exist on an internet-facing system that handles customer logins. The second issue may deserve attention first because the exposure and business importance are greater. Security teams have to consider where the vulnerability lives, what the system does, who can reach it, and what would happen if it were exploited. Technical severity matters, but it is not the only thing that matters. Prioritization becomes stronger when you combine technical severity with asset value, exposure, exploitability, and organizational impact. Exposure is one of the biggest factors that changes priority. A vulnerable system exposed to the public internet is usually more urgent than a similar system buried deep inside a restricted network. Public exposure means more potential attackers can reach the system. Internal exposure can still matter, especially if attackers may already have a foothold or if employees, contractors, or compromised devices can reach the vulnerable service. Exposure also includes cloud permissions, remote access paths, application interfaces, and partner connections. You are asking who or what can actually touch the vulnerable component. A serious weakness that no attacker can realistically reach may still need fixing, but it may not outrank a reachable weakness that is being scanned and targeted right now. This is why vulnerability management is not just reading scores. It is understanding the environment around the score. Exploitability is another major factor. A vulnerability may be theoretically serious, but difficult to exploit in practice. It might require unusual timing, a rare configuration, special knowledge, or access the attacker is unlikely to have. Another vulnerability may have public exploit code, active attacker use, and many exposed systems across the internet. That second situation changes the urgency. Security teams often pay close attention to whether exploitation has been observed in the wild. That phrase means attackers are using the weakness in real attacks, not just discussing it in research. Exploitability can change over time. A vulnerability may start as a technical report with no known exploit, then become more dangerous when attack instructions or automated tools appear. Prioritization should adapt as conditions change. A score assigned earlier may not fully reflect how attractive or easy the vulnerability has become for attackers. Asset criticality means the importance of the affected system, application, account, or data. Not every asset has the same value. A workstation used for routine browsing is not the same as a server that supports payroll, health records, manufacturing control, or customer authentication. A vulnerability in a low-value system may still be a problem, especially if it can be used as a stepping stone. But a vulnerability in a critical system can have a much larger impact. Asset criticality also includes trust relationships. A small server might be important because it has access to many other systems. A developer repository might be critical because it contains source code or secrets. An identity system is often highly critical because it controls access across the environment. When you prioritize, ask what the affected asset does, what it can reach, what data it holds, and how much the organization depends on it. Business context turns technical findings into practical decisions. A vulnerability on a public marketing site may create reputational and operational concerns. A vulnerability in a payment application may affect revenue, fraud risk, and legal obligations. A vulnerability in a hospital system may affect patient care. A vulnerability in a factory environment may affect physical operations and safety. The same technical weakness can carry different meaning depending on the business process behind it. This is why security teams often work with system owners, application teams, operations teams, and leadership. The scanner may find the weakness, but the business context explains the consequence. You do not need to become an expert in every industry to understand this idea. You just need to remember that security protects real work. Prioritization should reflect the value and consequences of that work, not only the technical description of the flaw. Remediation urgency is the decision about how quickly the organization should act. Sometimes urgency means patching immediately. Sometimes it means applying a temporary mitigation while testing a patch. Sometimes it means disabling a vulnerable feature, changing access rules, increasing monitoring, or removing a system from public exposure. Patching is important, but it is not always instant or simple. Updates can break applications, affect operations, or require maintenance windows. In some environments, especially those involving legacy systems or operational technology, changes must be tested carefully. That does not mean teams can ignore risk. It means they may need compensating controls while planning the fix. A compensating control is a different protective measure used to reduce risk when the preferred fix cannot happen right away. Good prioritization helps decide when speed matters most and when careful planning is safer. Vulnerability scanners and management tools often use CVE identifiers and CVSS scores to organize findings. These tools can be very helpful because they discover missing patches, insecure versions, weak configurations, and known exposures across many assets. They can also overwhelm a team if the results are treated as a giant list with no context. A report with thousands of findings is not automatically a plan. The team has to group related issues, remove duplicates, confirm what is real, and focus on the items that create the greatest risk. False positives can happen when a tool reports something that is not actually vulnerable in the way it appears. False negatives can happen when a tool misses a real issue. Tools give visibility, but people still need to validate, prioritize, and make decisions based on how the environment actually works. Another misunderstanding is thinking that once a vulnerability is patched, the security story is over. Fixing the immediate weakness is important, but mature teams also ask why the issue existed, how long it was present, whether attackers may have used it, and whether similar weaknesses exist elsewhere. If a public server was missing a critical patch for months, applying the update reduces future risk, but the team may still need to review logs for suspicious activity. If a cloud storage resource was public by mistake, changing the permission matters, but the team may also need to know whether sensitive data was accessed. Vulnerability management connects closely to detection and incident response. The existence of a vulnerability does not prove compromise, but a serious exposed vulnerability may justify investigation. Prioritization should include both fixing the weakness and considering whether harm may already have happened. As you study Security Plus version 8 and SY0801, keep the relationship between CVE, CVSS, and prioritization clear in your mind. A CVE identifier names a known vulnerability so people and tools can talk about the same issue. CVSS describes technical severity in a standardized way. Prioritization takes the next step by asking what the score means inside a real organization. You consider exposure, exploitability, asset criticality, business impact, available fixes, and evidence of active attacks. That is the difference between memorizing security terms and thinking like a defender. Numbers and identifiers are useful because they bring order to messy information. They become far more useful when you connect them to context. The best security decisions are not made by panic, and they are not made by scores alone. They are made by understanding what is most likely to cause meaningful harm and acting there first.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.